spotlight is on so-called forever chemicals after the government launched major legal action against manufacturing giant 3M over the use of toxic PFAS in firefighting foam used by the Department of Defence. Seeking damages of more than $2 billion, Australia's Attorney-General has accused 3M of withholding and misrepresenting details about the foam and its environmental impact and assuring that it was safe despite knowing all of the risks. Joining us now is Dr. Nicholas Chatres, who is a Senior Research Fellow at the University of Sydney. Thank you so much for coming in. You can't underestimate how massive this legal action is, the largest ever brought by the federal government. The allegations are outrageous. As far as you see it, is there any way that 3M could not have known the danger of these chemicals that they were using on Australian soil?
No, it's well established that 3M had internal information as early as the 1980s on the toxicity of these chemicals and also the fact that they were persistent or could persist in the environment, and they're also incredibly mobile, so they could travel through the environment. So they knew that in the 1980s. They withheld that information from regulators like the US Environmental Protection Agency, and they continue to sell that product to make billions of dollars.
So how was it used? Was it to put out fires on these defence sites?
Yeah, specifically it's referring to aqueous film forming foam, which is firefighting foam, and it has a specific chemical known as PFAS in it. It was used on 28 Defence Force bases throughout Australia, and the issue with the chemical is not only is it toxic, but it's also very mobile. So once it's in the environment, it can spread into groundwater and also into drinking water. So the surrounding communities have been impacted by it.
Yes, look, residents have been speaking for years about the impact about this. In fact, for about a decade. Let's have a listen to what some of those residents who live near these affected sites, these defence bases, have said.
We can't sell. Our house is unsellable.
I have done everything to protect my child except stop him breathing the air.
We are in an area that's called the red zone, the contamination zone. Our community, and I'm certainly part of that, we feel abandoned. Focus on cleaning this area up and giving us our life back.
What happens for them next?
It's a good question. So I'm unsure of what the government's intention is if the suit is successful, but certainly these communities have been impacted. There's a huge amount of psychological stress, but also potential health impacts from these chemicals as well. So it's important that they're supported and they're compensated duly.
Yeah, okay. Look, how does someone know if they're affected by forever chemicals like this?
It's very difficult. 98% to 100% of all Australians have it in their blood right now. So that's the big concern, that these have incredibly long half-lives. That basically means that they don't break down. It takes decades, if not centuries, and they're ubiquitous. They're everywhere in the environment. They're everywhere in our blood, like I said before. So there is a raft of health effects associated with them. It's been well established by authoritative bodies around the world that they're carcinogens, and they also lead to a series of different other effects like immunological effects, so we're more susceptible to infections. They also increase our risk of cardiovascular disease. So the health effects are concerning, and the communities around those areas have right to be concerned.
Give us some sort of comparison here for what these forever chemicals can do to a person, as opposed to, we know, the daily risks that you might take, like drinking out of a plastic water bottle when it's been sitting in a hot car, or putting plastic in the microwave, that kind of thing. You know, are these PFAS chemicals that we're talking about that were used on these defence bases, is that like that on steroids?
Yeah, it's difficult because it depends on the level of exposure an individual has to the chemicals. So it depends on whether they're, like you mentioned before, drinking water, eating contaminated food. So everyone's risk level will be different depending on the exposure. But as I said before, it's been established these are carcinogens. So it is logical that people that are exposed or living around these defence ball spaces that would have higher levels of exposure would have increased risks of exposure and potential health harms then.
Look, whenever we do anything on forever chemicals,
yes.
Our phone lines go into meltdown with people wanting to know how they can minimise their exposure, putting this case aside. What would be your advice?
Yeah, it's very difficult. We need the government to take interventions globally and in Australia, because there's 15,000 variants of PFAS chemicals. So we're talking about one specific one that was used in firefighting foam, and another one that was ubiquitous was PFAS, which was in Teflon pans. These have been banned and phased out globally, but as I said, there's 15,000 other variants, and so as a class of chemical they should be banned unless they're critical in terms of serving a particular function, for instance in a medical device, but we certainly should be banning these and not relying on individuals to try to protect themselves, because once they're in the environment there's little we can do. But if you're at home and you want to make changes, try not to buy stain-resistant or non-stick products, because that's typically where they're highest in those products.
And when you heat those up, so you're talking about like those
just in general,
pans.
yeah, just whether you heat it up or not. So if you have if you have a waterproof rain jacket, if you have a stain-resistant couch, if you have plastic products are ubiquitous in plastic products or in cosmetics, they're basically in everything, unfortunately. And this is a concern. We don't know the total level of exposure. We don't know how many we've been exposed to every day. So the safest thing we can do is to ban them as a class of chemicals and then stop that exposure from happening at a global level.
Wow. Nicholas, thank you so much for coming in. Just, fascinating. Senior Research Fellow at the University of Sydney. Thank you. Here's David.